Welcome back to RSA Conference 2021, live from Virtual Broadcast Alley. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this segment is a good friend, Frank Catucci. He is now head of AppSec at Data Robot. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you. Nice to be on again. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, I like bringing you on primarily because in your former role over at Gartner, you were tracking application security, DevSecOps. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time catching up on, what's going on in the application security space. You get a lot of insight from your previous job. You're moving into a new role, which is fantastic for you, I think. Let's just talk a little bit, though, of, what are some of the big trends right now when we think about application security?
Yeah, there's three main trends right now that I'm kind of seeing to be gaining momentum, I would say. The first one would be as we witnessed, the software supply chain, right? Securing that software supply chain, making sure that the updates and things that you're getting are secure, and that there's no hidden backdoors or things of that nature. And tied into that software security that software pipeline chain is the open source components. It seems like software composition analysis has been around for a long time, but based on breach data and customer conversations, the security of the components, the open source libraries, and most importantly, their dependencies, seems to be something that is continuously being targeted or even exploited. So I would say that those are the first two that tie in together as far as the some of the trends that are occurring and some of the I would say focus of a lot of AppSec groups and ProdSec. The second one is a little bit of a shift, or the third one I should say is a little bit of a shift. I think everyone knows at this point that more of a dev-centric or dev-friendly kind of DevOps or DevSecOps effort is really the goal of many organizations. But to go one step further with that, a lot of the trends that we're seeing I'm also seeing is the convergence of not only application security, but the convergence of cloud and infrastructure security merging into AppSec focus and responsibility. So we look at things that were typically an ops directed type of focus. And now we're changing to not only DevOps, but also we're having policy as code. We're looking at CSPM. We're looking at infrastructure as code. We might be using functions as a service. There's a lot of different intricacies that are really tying those platforms together, from traditional cloud sec and cloud operations and application security, especially within containers and modern environments. So I would say that a lot of those responsibilities and that convergence of those two areas really are changing the definition of what would probably be cloud sec versus AppSec, and it's really just converging into that more of a central type of workforce that's really addressing those particular areas. So those are the 2 to 3 main trends that I would say that are particularly gaining steam and top focus these days.
Yeah, I want to click on both of those areas. Let's start with the supply chain. We know the SolarWinds hack has been all over the news for months on end. We've seen some really great research coming out of our former employer, Qualys, with the sudo vulnerabilities in open source and the latest one in the XML server. And when we think about this, you said it, software composition analysis has been around for a long time. I think people are taking it more seriously, but I don't think it's easy. In really understanding the dependencies of what's running in these applications. Like, okay, I bring in a package, but that package brings in X number of other packages, and how deep are the software composition analysis tools going? I think somebody like a SNCC, for example, who's a previous sponsor on the show, does a really good job of understanding transient vulnerabilities, etc. But there's more evolution in the space, I think, because we see all this legacy open source that's got all these vulnerabilities from things that have been hanging around for 10, 15,
Decades.
20 years. Yeah, yep. Right? Not no one's digging deep into those old open source projects. Their dependencies in operating systems and in other systems that we're building. This is a huge issue, and I think the positive out of SolarWinds is that it's more on the radar screen. But are organizations really making progress on that yet, or are they still kind of in the early stages?
I would say more of, larger enterprises taking that more seriously. I would say that they're further down the road in the adoption and understanding exactly some of the complexities that come into those open source components and their dependencies. I would say that a lot of other folks that may not be, large enterprise or tech-based, tech-savvy kind of companies, they're still behind the curve. But that kind of holds true for a variety of different scenarios, and I think that that's not exclusive to open source or SCA. But I would say that a lot of the larger corporations, technologically kind of competent or aware organizations, are taking that seriously. They are doing more. I think SolarWinds was another big wake up call. The intricacies again of SolarWinds were a little bit different because those packages were signed
right.
and things like that, but. It's still, it was that great push forward where perhaps they didn't have the momentum or the focus on those open source components primarily. There are certain solutions like you mentioned out there that do a really good job. There are also certain solutions out there that do not pick up customized libraries and customized dependencies. So if it's not just strictly out of a trusted source or something that's known and you're doing some custom coding or porting for some of those apps or libraries, that they may not pick up all of that. So that's still on the radar. I would say that most companies are very aware. I would say that, before the SolarWinds hack, I would put it probably at about 70% attention rate, give or take. And right now, I would say that we're much more beyond that, especially in the enterprise space. But it's not an easy implementation, and it's hard to put across all of your code bases. So it does take a little bit of extra time and obviously manpower to get those solutions kind of implemented. So even though the push is there and the companies are progressing, there's still a level of inevitable immaturity that is occurring, and we're trying to fill that gap now from the most part, from what I see.
Yeah. I want to go to a bigger story in a second around this, but I want to go to your cloud AppSec convergence a little bit. I mean, when I look at the application security space, it's so complex. Like, I need a SAST, I need an SCA, I need an IAST, I need a DAST, I need a WAF, I need API security, I need to manage container security. I got cloud workload protection platforms. I've got cloud security posture management. I just rattled off 8 solutions.
Yep.
And I might be missing a couple, but I'm pretty darn close. That's a lot of complexity. And when you think about trying to manage all this, we've got infrastructure as a code. There's another one, right? When you start thinking about all these different solutions, how do organizations tackle the complexity of addressing those 9 or 10 different things we just rattled off in a streamlined process? Because holy cow, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a ton of work. There's some progress there, though. So if you look at some of the acquisitions or even some of the grassroots efforts to change overall product lines, on the positive of that, we have the players out there like Accurix, Prisma Cloud from Palo Alto, some of the stuff that Trend Micro is even doing, to try to roll in a lot of those capabilities, at least into one. Again, not the SCA and SAST per se. That's still your typical AppSec vendors, but your cloud vendors and your container vendors, they're starting to roll those things into one, making it a little bit easier. Now, there's dollars attached to that, of course, especially for a singular platform. But there is an evolution, I think, that's occurring mostly in the cloud space that is absorbing some of the app responsibilities. Now, those folks still have the same skill sets, right? There's still some basic coding and AppSec knowledge and background knowledge, as well as modern cloud infrastructure knowledge that needs to be included. But there are these solutions, these like large scale CSPMs that seem to be doing a good job at tying these different pieces together, right? Just the three I mentioned. But yes, for an organization to implement that procedurally, that's a lot easier said than done. Procedurally, there's just a lot of different stakeholders in place. And the most successful ones that I've seen so far have been the very focused, consolidated, top-down efforts where there's a conscious decision to hire and get these teams working together on a larger initiative. And if that lacks, usually these things get pushed out, a year, 2, 3 years longer than they should. And by that time, we might be moving on to different trends. So yeah, the manpower it takes to implement these is tremendous, some more than others. But again, the ones that I've seen that were successful are the C-levels that really get it, that want to make security part of their overall model. And those are the folks that are allocating those resources and skills to do that. But it's definitely not cheap, and it's definitely not easy.
Yeah, and that you tie into the third part I wanted to ask you about a little bit is, where do we see the market consolidation coming? Do we see consolidation around AppSec and a separate consolidation around cloud, or do you see cloud and AppSec convergence starting to come together? Because we can look at some pure plays, right? We know who they are. The Synopsises of the world, the Qualises have built a lot of really good application security capabilities. You've got what Palo Alto's done, I think, really effectively with Prisma Cloud, bringing in capabilities. You talked about Accurix. Checkpoint has done some stuff in the space as well. We see the Fastly acquisition of Signal Sciences bringing that stuff together. But we're still seeing them kind of in their AppSec versus CloudSec buckets. Do we also see consolidation across AppSec and CloudSec a bit?
A little bit, but not necessarily where you need it. There's a couple of different things. The consolidation from the WAF providers, right? They're offering web application firewall, API security, DDoS protection, bot mitigation. Those are the consolidations that we're seeing in that bucket. And then we have the bucket of software composition analysis, build time container security, SCA, SAST, DAST, IAST, etc. And there's consolidation there, right? So those vendors are consolidating, the Vericodes and the Synopsys, and those folks are really consolidating their products. And then from the cloud point of view, yeah, we have this container security and policies, and whether you're using OPA and or other policy as code, when we have this like three separate kind of convergence buckets, but there's very little that's being done, and I would say for right now, with a few exceptions, to bring those convergences together, right? To bring those separate merges and acquisitions that have happened, like Palo Alto buying Bridge Crew, and getting Checkoff and some infrastructure as code pieces. But you really have this consolidation that happened in these more siloed formats rather than across the board. And so, yeah, the Accurix is starting to get there with like the DevOps pieces. But for the large part of the majority of these solutions, even though the convergence of the skill sets and the jobs that are occurring in these areas between cloud and app are coming together, a lot of those product suites are not really merging in as fast as I would have hoped. But then again, there's a lot of complexity wrapped in there, and you kind of have to do your R&D and diligence to make sure that you're doing what's best for all of your customers in those specific areas. So yeah, there's convergence within the areas, but they're not all very much converging together for the most part to bring that cloud and app kind of together.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah, and I'm curious how the GitLabs and the GitHubs of the world. I mean, GitLab's been doing some really great stuff. They're a sponsor as well of integrating different security checks and tests into the pipeline. Do the pipeline vendors can they consolidate some of this as well? Because, I mean, if you're controlling the pipeline, you're doing the builds, you're doing the deployments out of these pipelines, are they potentially in an interesting position to do some of this cross-consolidation?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you look at GitLab, right? They have a left to right scenario. They're basically have an SCA, a SAST, a DAST, et cetera. They have those consolidated. GitHub Advanced Security as well has that consolidated, a lot of different pieces there. But that's also assuming that your pipeline is cloud-based and accessible based on their platform, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of folks out there who use GitLab on-prem. Where it does have some of the hindrances for some of those services. And then, we're also not tying in any of that cloud infrastructure. Now, we could be tying in cloud deployment, but that cloud infrastructure piece is still not really fully handled by the pipelines, right? They may be assisting in it, but there's certain components of that cloud infrastructure that still happen either natively or separately within those cloud service providers where it's not necessarily occurring. Now, the consolidations for the pipeline tools on the SAST and SCA and DAST, yeah, that can definitely happen, and I think we're seeing that, like you mentioned, GitLab. GitHub Advanced Security, et cetera. But that's, again, there are exceptions there with the setups and, on-prem versus cloud on their platform, et cetera. But they're definitely in the right place, but not so much for the infrastructure piece for the cloud.
Got it.
In my opinion.
Any new innovation in the space that we should be aware of?
I would say, the newest innovation for me is coming from a few different areas. One is the speed in which a lot of the more traditional DevOps scans and things that are occurring seem to be taking the path, right? The shift lefts, the sneaks, the SEMLs, SEMGREP, right? All of the really high speed type of SaaS that really works within the pipeline. That really works within CI/CD, that's really instant. That's going to be a key area. I would say the other kind of new and fun area is a lot of what some of the cloud WAF providers are starting to offer, and that's like pure API discovery, where they're reverse proxying the traffic. They're going to get that discovery out there way better than maybe doing it a different way. But I would say that those two things are really evolving quickly, last, I would say the other thing that I see evolving fairly quickly is the ability to try to just basically work out those processes and policies with internal teams seems to be evolving much faster than it has been in the last decade. Again, that's more of internal what I was seeing based on talking to different clientele, but it was a net positive given that way. Not specifically from a product standpoint, but from a practice standpoint.
That's good. Frank, thank you for your insights. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Always a pleasure. I appreciate it. Look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll take a quick break and then come back with more interviews for RSA Conference 2021.